So, good day everyone. I am Gerald Monton and I'm going to discuss the transformation of civil society in Indonesia as a part of report Group 3. So, looking back first, former President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono consistently highlighted that Islam and democracy go hand in hand, describing Indonesia as the world's third largest democracy, as well as the world's most populous Muslim nation, observing political upheavals in the Arab world since early 2011. He expressed that Indonesia's vibrant democracy could serve as a model for other Muslim countries. So, indeed, Indonesia has held 4 general elections and 3 direct elections since 1999, all of which were relatively peaceful and fair. So, although there have been some regional disputes involving ethnic and religious groups as well as terrorist attacks, these issues have largely subsided. So, next is a brief discussion. So, against the backdrop of stale transition in the Middle East, semi-authoritarian rule in nearby Singapore and Malaysia, and a repeat military coup in Thailand, it's worth looking at Indonesia's democratic transition and consolidation circumstances. In comparing Indonesia to Middle Eastern governments or other authoritarian Southeast Asian countries, it is not intended to idealize the Indonesian situation. Rather, to propose this report is to highlight the paradoxes and challenges that Indonesian democracy faces. So, to illustrate the broader political configuration in Indonesia, so we have to explore the function of civil society in democratic transition. So, the second is President Joko Widodo Jokowi, a product of democratic reform, is analyzed in the light of contemporary civil events. So, on the other hand, Jokowi's achievement reflects the expanding influence of civil society, while on the other, it exposes the fracturing of civil society. Next, the timeline of events. So, the transitioning to civil society, there have been the spectacular clash in Jakarta in May 1998 was eerily similar to what happened on stage or backstage in Cairo in February 2011. Before ousting the former president Suharto, who had governed for more than 30 years, students held a march of demanding reformacy, which means reformation, and occupied the parliament building. Backstage, the soldiers abandoned the ruler and issued an ultimatum. So, students activists maintained strong contact with the political elite, which included military generals and governing party politicians. So, Muslim students' organizations were especially crucial in connecting students activists on the streets with their alumni in parliament. During Suharto's authoritarian administration, representatives from major religious organizations had also become members of the secular ruling party, which is called Golkar. So, around 1990, Muslim activists began to actively participate in the ruling party. That is, Golkar had steadily been Islamized, or at the very least secular. So, as a result, these civil society groups were not completely independent of the authoritarian regime. The erstwhile political elites' physical and ideological proximity to civil society groups organizations resulted in a very smooth transition in Indonesia. Following the transition, some CSO members became politicians. So, political parties were created by the leaders of 2 major Muslim groups, Nahdlatul Ulama, and Muhammadiyah. So, except for the current Choki government, all governments created what they call this rainbow coalitions involved a large majority of parliament after the transition. So although coalitions were not always stable and criticisms of the government frequently appeared inside them, problems between political parties were generally sorted through backdoor negotiation. Others drifted, even if not resolved by legal or judicial proceedings. Although the military no longer has appointed seats in the House, some former generals have joined the political parties and kept informal influence. Differences between Islamic and secular parties are insignificant. So, lastly, Indonesia's political reforms, for better or worse, were not traumatic actually. So, the continuity of the old and new political elites, their ideological compatibility, and the elite's proximity to uh, civil society groups made it easier to build consensus on gradual democratic reforms. So, these circumstances contrast with the polarizations and tensions in Egypt and Thailand, where conflicts between old and new ruling elites could not be resolved by legitimate methods. So, and military coups rejected popularly elected administration. As a result, some of the urban middle class accepted, even applauded the undemocratic measures. So that's all. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I'm Charlotte Bautista, and today I'm going to tackle about the Philippines fractious civil society. So civil society in the Philippines originated in 19th century Spanish colonial welfare and Roman Catholic parish organizations, which existed to resist colonialism. So looking back, since the time of Jose Rizal, civil society organizations became relevant, especially against the wrongful acts of colonizers. To name a few, propaganda movement led by Rizal was founded to demand civil and political rights for Filipinos in Spain. We can also include the Katipunan, highest, most respected society of the children of our nation, which is a movement of resistance and transformation that began as a secret society among the working poor. So civil society organizations founded during the American and Japanese times also helped the Filipino citizens to access basic democratic rights. So this includes the localized Red Cross, the women's suffrage groups, private non-profit organizations in the form of religious and academic institutions, and the government-supported rural credit cooperatives. So, civil society in the Philippines has been both boon and bane for the post-authoritarian democratization project. So, civil society engagements have occasionally aided in the extension of core democratic rights and freedoms to previously marginalized groups, but haven't always resulted in change toward more open, participatory, and responsible politics. So, a good example of this is the EDSA People Power Revolution, which happened in 2001. So in here, a section of civil society mobilized to remove a popularly elected president, which is former President Joseph Estrada, only halfway through his term in January 2001. So the civil society campaign to oust Estrada has engendered a maximalist political culture, calling into question the purported link between civil society and democratic values and attitudes. Its singular focus on Estrada made it vulnerable to another kind of elite manipulation. Thus, it ended up being unable to prevent and perhaps even facilitated a return of the traditional political elite who, once back in power, backed away from promised reforms and reinforcing an inequitable status quo. So, today's civil society is, among other things, a political battleground highlighted by fault lines along which groups compete for power and ideas are either eroded or reinforced. One conflict is between those who believe in the traditional elite view of democracy's meaning and purpose, and others who believe in a more common understanding, which Mutia Alagapa refers to as a non-status quo institutions. That's all. Thank you.
So, this is the report of South Korea confrontation legacy and democratic contribution. So, South Koreans choose their fourth president since the country's transition to procedural democracy in 1987 December 2002. The significance of this election is that on the surface they show that South Korea has successfully transitioned to a fully democratic style of governance. So this is President Kim Dae-jung. Today, unlike in the years immediately following the 1987 elections, and even as the 1997 Asian financial crisis, there is widespread agreement that a return to pre-1987 levels of military engagement in politics or seizure of power by an incumbent president is nearly inconceivable. So the military has grown sufficiently professional to reject any talk of a military coup. The election process appears to be deeply embedded in South Korean culture, with the rising expectation that campaigns would be managed properly, or at the very least, with less evident corruption. Political parties, while still prone to personality domination and a lack of ideological differentiation, are widely acknowledged as a viable vehicle of communicating political demands within society. So, even more importantly, as South Korea's democracy matures, there is a rising desire from civic groups and individual residents for fair and responsive leaders. So, civic action aimed at exposing and isolating corrupt and inept politicians inside the system has developed in recent years. The son of recent President Kim Dae-jung and Kim Yong-sam has been convicted for political wrongdoing. Prominent businesses have been punished for a financial malfeasance. Some politicians have been ousted from office for political corruption, and generals have been barred from participating in the political process. According to Adam Prowadzki, South Korea is reaching the minimal structural requirements for democratic consolidation when democracy becomes the only game in town and all the losers want to do is try again inside the same institution that they just lost. So let's proceed to democratic transition in South Korea. A collection of historical evidence implies that there was a proto-democratic movement in Korea linked with the Minjung peoples movement of the later Yi dynasty, which culminated in the Tonghak Eastern Learning revolt of the 1918 of the late 1800s, according to John Ki Chang-o. O claims that the Tonghak movement teachings contained the earliest discernible embryos of what may be called populist beliefs. In other places, the Tonghak Revolt is cited as an inspiration for Korean resistance groups over the years. The relevance of this relationship is that these resistance groups are now serving as a source of inspiration for much of the passion for Korean nationalism among Korea's younger generation. Analysts studying the growth of democracy in Korea have typically neglected these resistance movements, possibly because they have never been especially effective in attaining any serious political influence. So, the spectacular manner in which the Republic of Korea's political institutions were founded is a big part of why South Korea has piqued the interest of researchers interested in democratic transition. S- South Korean society has no experience with democratic institutions before the adoption of the first constitution in 1948. Most Koreans had little experience of democratic institutions or representative politics during 35 years of Japanese rule, which ended with World War II. The decision by the US military government in Korea to establish a separate Korean state south of the 38th parallel came after 3 years of military occupation in the face of a communist regime in in the Russian occupied zone north of the 38th parallel that refused to agree on agree to UN supervised elections. Not unexpectedly, the American presidential system had a profound impact on the organization of the First Republic. Syngman Rhee, who was educated and spent over 40 years in exile in the United States, was technically elected by the National Assembly but picked by the United States to be the country's first leader. The unicameral National Assembly consisted of 200 lawmakers, 85 of whom were officially classed as independent, and the remaining 115 members were selected from 14 political groups. So that's all. Thank you.
So good day everyone. My name is Ella Marie D. Sitchon and I will going to discuss Taiwan, no civil society, no democracy. So Taiwan has long been celebrated for its economic miracle and political stability between 1950 and the mid 1980s. The nationalist Kuomintang or KMT regime was described as authoritarian in the majority of works. So, in the 20 years since Taiwan's transitions from authoritarianism to democracy, the scholars have sought explanations for this impressive transformation of Taiwanese politics. Unlike in South Korea, the democratic transitions in Taiwan has either been regarded as predominantly elite-dominated or primarily attributed to ethno-nationalist sentiments. This is not to say that the observers have completely overlooked the role of civil society in the democratization process. But very few studies have looked at the democratic transitions from the standpoint of the civil society. Next is civil society. So civil society has made significant contributions to the democratic transition primarily by mobilizing political opposition, constructing counter narratives and ideologies, and mobilizing international support for alternative elites. Through this, the resistance and mass mobilization, civil society began to delegitimize the nation state and the incumbent government in the late 1970s rather. The opposition movement not only mobilized its supporters in electoral campaigns and on the streets, but also they created the counter narratives through the publication of numerous illegal magazines. Next is mobilizing political resistance. In 1979, the regime imprisoned the majority of the Formosa magazine group leaders, the mother and the twin daughter of Lin Yi-hyung or Lin Yi-hyung, one of the imprisoned opposition leaders, were murdered at home the following year. These terror tactics intended to stifle to Taiwan's democratic movement. Instead, galvanized more Taiwanese into action. Not only did more people join the opposition movement, but the society as a whole showed its support. Example of this is government mass mobilization. Many governments makes effort to mobilize the populace to vote in elections and other voting events. The political parties in any countries must be able to mobilize voters in order to gain support for their party, which affects voters to turn out in general. So next is the Formosa. This is the Republic of Formosa was a short-lived republic that existed on the island of Taiwan in 1895 between the formal cession of Taiwan by the Qing dynasty of China to the Empire of Japan by the Treaty of Shimonoseki and its being taken over by the Japanese troops. So these people did not choose to become member because of their desire for political participation in a democratic society, but they took the risk simply because they believed that by joining, they could protect the new party. So in conclusion, during Taiwan's democratic transition, the civil society's relationship with the state has been antagonistic. By constructing counter-narratives against the ruling regime, the civil society has played an important role in delegitimizing the states. In the 1980s, emerging civil society, it is successfully mobilized political opposition and social protest, and then they form strategic alliances to push for democratizations. So the Thailand civil society demonstrated the ability to generate a political alternative and garner international support in order to maintain a balance of power in favor of democratic forces, thereby maintaining the momentum of the democratic transition. Thank you for listening.
Good day everyone, I am Mary Gisette S. Rafinan and I will be going to discuss about the expanding and the contracting demographic space of India. Let's begin with the paradox of India. India today has a population of more than 1 billion people, speaking 18 major languages and 1,600 minor languages and dialects. India has 28 states and 7 union territories, more than 500 principalities and British India with different histories, language, culture, and resources came together to form the Republic of India in 1950. India's economic growth has been impressive. It is one of the few developing countries to have enjoyed sustained growth in per capita income since 1950, but levels of human development remain very low. Some 55% of children under the age of 5 remained malnourished, nearly twice levels reported in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The progress of post-colonial India thus presents a mixed picture. The country has made striking achievements in some sectors but has failed massively in many dimensions of human development. Certainly, the fruits of India's economic development has not reached the poor, the marginalized, and the deprived. This failure highlights the persistence of widespread inequality and reflects the extent of human deprivation.
Mapping India's civil society, the process of democratization of society and polity, has varied from region to region. The Indian state's federal structure has also encouraged the diverse levels and democratizations in different regions of the country. As a result, civil society growth differs depending on the federal unit of state. the amount of development of conventional political institutions, and the current status of democracy and political mobilization. And as a result, in certain areas, civil society is vibrant and well developed, while in the others, its space is decreasing. Despite this time and space distinction, charting the civil society turn provides insights into India's civil society space. Toward democratization, two case studies to address a basic project of investigating civil society and political change. We offer two case studies. First, Ekta Parishad, Struggle of Enlightenment and Rights of Tribals and Forest. It mobilizes people, especially the poor, around the topic of equitable and proper resource allocation for people-centered development. It mandates the local communities have authority over their livelihood resources, and this claim is expressed as a demand for jal, jungle, and jamin, or in other words, water, forest, and land. The movement's main goal is to accomplish peaceful and democratic social, political, and economic transformation while also empowering underprivileged people and putting them at the center of the development process. Second, Major Kisan Shakti Sangtan. Struggle to make the state accountable and transparent. Its remarkable struggle for transparency makes it an appealing case study for studying India's civil society and democracy. However, two important consequences of the movement should be noted, and the movement instigations a progressive socio-political change in the areas where it operates and its influence on making the state more open and responsible. So these two cases have advanced to essential components of democracy, rights, and transparency. By giving us a clear picture of civil society role influencing political change in modern India, and however, these case studies highlighting the civil society triumphs should be seen in light of the constraints mentioned before. By these two case studies will fall under the heading system transformation within system change, including policy reform.
Good day, everyone. I am Vidamo, and I'm going to discuss Japan, social capital without democracy. So first, let's define Japan. Japan is an East Asian island republic in the Northwest Pacific Ocean. The Sea of Japan borders is on the west, and it stretches from the Sea of Okhotsk in the north to the East China Sea and Taiwan in the south. Hokkaido, Honshu, which is the mainland of Japan, Shikoku, Kyushu, and Okinawa are the five major islands. Tokyo is the capital and the largest city of Japan. Yokohama, Osaka, Nagoya, Sapporo, Fukuoka, Kobe, and Kyoto are the prominent cities. Japan is famous for its Mount Fuji, tea ceremonies, geisha, calligraphy, origami, and etc. Japan is a constitutional monarchy with a civil law system. In 2020, the Economist Intelligence Unit rated Japan as a full democracy. So, next is the politics of Japan. Japan's politics are governed by a multi-party, bicameral parliamentary representative democratic constitutional monarchy in which the emperor is the head of the state and the prime minister is the head of government and the head of the government or the cabinet which directs the executive branch. The National Diet, which comprises of the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors, have legislative powers. The House of Representatives has 18 standing committees with membership ranging from 20 to 50 members, while the House of Councillors have 16 with membership ranging from 10 to 45 members. The Supreme Court and lesser courts have judicial power, and the Japanese people have sovereignty under the Constitution. Japan is a constitutional monarchy with a civil law system. So, Social capital. Social capital is a network together with shared norms, values, and understandings that facilitate cooperation within or among groups. So, social capital refers to the stocks of social trust, standards, and networks that individuals can draw to solve common problems. Two aspects of social capital are valued by social scientists, which are the social glue and the social bridges. Social glue refers to people's willingness to join in group activities. So, there are two main ways that social capital can aid in a transition to democracy. First is it provides a space for the creation and dissemination of discourse critical of the present government. Number two, it provides a way for active opposition to the regime to grow. So, in conclusion, um, considering Japan is also a democratic country, it is evident that they are utilizing or exercising social capital, bonding, or a set of shared values that enable individuals to effectively work together in a group to achieve a common goal or interest. The concept is frequently used to depict how members of society can work together to live in peace. So, that's it.